trust no one with power. The founders warned us over and over and over again that power always expands, no matter who holds it and wields it. You can't trust anyone with power, even if you like the person with the power or you like the things they are doing with it currently, because that same power will eventually be in the hands of someone else, someone who might be hell-bent on destroying your liberty. So on this episode, I've got some powerful and long-ignored warnings from the founders, Federalist and anti-Federalist alike, about the dangers of power, precedent, and trust that we can't afford to ignore any longer. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Boldin with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. And I want to kick it off with this great 1772 quote from John Adams. He said, "There is danger from all men. The only maxim of a free government ought to be to trust no man living with power to endanger the public liberty. Not just some of them, not most of them. All of them deserve to be distrusted." Now, I think John Adams is maybe the best example of this maxim, maybe in American history. During the American Revolution, he was known as the Atlas of Independence, a fierce defender of the natural rights of the people. But once he got into power as president some years later, things totally flipped. And Mercy Otis Warren, in her great history of the rise, progress, and termination of the American Revolution, described his shift from Atlas of Independence to monarchist. Here's a brief piece. She said, "Endowed with a comprehensive genius, well acquainted with the history of men and nations, and having long appeared to be actuated by the principles of integrity, by a zeal for the rights of men, and an honest indignation at the ideas of despotism, it was viewed as a kind of political phenomenon when discovered that Mr. Adams's former opinions were beclouded by a partiality for monarchy." Now, in other words, don't trust anyone with power to endanger the public liberty, including the people who say don't trust anyone with power to endanger the liberty. And here's how John Adams put it and it was originally written in 1763, but I'm not sure if it was ever published at that time, but he had some comments on it later again in his notes in 1807. He said, it's titled "An Essay on Man's Lust for Power." He said, "This is the great and important and melancholy truth that is conveyed to us by the old maxim that I have chosen for the motto of this paper, that all men would be tyrants if they could." This was certainly part of the message of Cato's letters in the early part of the 18th century from Trenchard and Gordon, and much further back on that as well. The founders and old revolutionaries were not just students of history, they also were students of human nature. They understood how things would play out. Here, for example, John Dickinson in his great Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania in 1767. "All artful rulers who strive to extend their power beyond its just limits endeavor to give their attempts as much semblance of legality as possible." In other words, if you give them limits on their power, all artful rulers, and that's probably redundant right there, all rulers tend to kind of try to twist things to expand their power over and over time. Dickinson continued, he said, "Those who succeed them may venture to go a little further, for each new encroachment will be strengthened by a former. That which is now supported by examples growing old will become an example itself." That quote was from the great Roman historian Tacitus, so we know that this mentality goes all the way back to that time, if not earlier. Anyways, that which is now supported by examples will become an example itself, and thus support fresh usurpations. Samuel Adams, in a letter to James Warren, put it this way: "Maybe the pun of the century, pun of my lifetime, power," wrote Samuel Adams, "is intoxicating, and men legally vested with it too often discover a disposition to make an ill use of it and an unwillingness to part with it. And George Mason in the Philadelphia Convention in 1787, he pointed out the same type of thing. Those who have power in their hands will not give it up while they can retain it. On the contrary, we know they will always, when they can, rather increase it. In other words, power always seeks to expand. And that's exactly how Abigail Adams put it in a letter to John Adams in late 1775. She said, "Power, whether vested in many or a few, is ever grasping, and like the grave, cries, 'Give, give.'" But wait, there's more. She said, "The great fish swallow up the small, and he who is most strenuous for the rights of the people when vested with power is as eager after the prerogatives of government." In other words, the people who are best on liberty, soon as they have power, well, things change. And I think this is a great example or a great description of what happened with her husband, John Adams, even if she may not have agreed with that. Now, despite all of these people, and this is just scratching the surface, this is a widely held view. And despite all of this long-held understanding about human nature and the maxims of government power, Mercy Otis Warren also lamented in her great history book, there is a propensity in mankind to enlist themselves under the authority of names and to adopt the opinions of men of celebrity more from the fashion of the times than from the convictions of reason. Thus, she writes, with the borrowed language of their chieftain, they impose upon themselves until they think his opinions are their own, and are often wrought up to such a fierce spirit of contention that they appear ready to defend them in all the cruel modes of the savage, who is seldom actuated by motives of candor and forgiveness of injuries. And Samuel Adams had a kind of a similar take in 1748. We don't even think of the American Revolution and generally the principles, the radical change in the viewpoints of the people starting until the 1760s. But Samuel Adams, one of his earliest, if not his first, published essay at 26 years old, he warned against this same type of thing. He said it is a very great mistake to imagine that the object of loyalty is the authority and interest of one individual man, however dignified by the applause or enriched by the success of popular actions. And it was this kind of understanding that likely led Patrick Henry to hammer it home in the Virginia Ratifying Convention in 1788. He said, "Guard with jealous attention the public liberty. Suspect everyone who approaches that jewel." And for Samuel Adams, back to his 1748 essay in the Advertiser, for him, true loyalty is actually founded in the love and possession of liberty. The goal should be to attain liberty, not to, support an individual. That's what Samuel Adams was pointing out, and that's what Mercy Otis Warren was lamenting that people have done all through history. Anyways, Adams continued, "This love of liberty includes in it a thorough knowledge of our Constitution, its conveniences and defects, as well as its real advantages, a becoming jealousy of our immunities, and a steadfast resolution to maintain them." Years later, one of my favorite essays ever written during the Revolution was Samuel Adams writing as Candidus in the publication of the Sons of Liberty, the Boston Gazette. He said, "All might be free if they valued freedom and defended it as they ought." And decades earlier had a similar take, which is if you have a true loyalty and a love of liberty, you understand the rules of the Constitution, even the unwritten British Constitution. What's good about it and what's bad about it. You have to be just really open about these things, and a jealousy, a kind of a guarded approach of our immunities, of our privileges, of our rights, our liberties, and a resolution to maintain them against, all comers. All might be free if they valued freedom and defended it as they ought. John Dickinson and Thomas Jefferson put liberty first again in their Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms, which was passed unanimously by the Second Continental Congress less than 3 months after the shot heard around the world at Lexington and Concord, July 6, 1775 was the passage of this declaration. Our attachment to no nation upon earth should supplant our attachment to liberty. And now, when you think about this, and you think about the fact that liberty has to be the goal, that you can't trust anyone with power because that power is going to expand, and this is just part of human nature. That's why we also have to think of the fact that when someone we like has power and maybe in the short term does stuff with that power that we're in favor of, we also have to think about the long-term impacts of this. What is someone else going to do with this same power in the future? Here's the first Chief Justice, John Jay, reminding us that a power to do good always involves a power to do harm. And the third Chief Justice, Oliver Ellsworth, had a similar take. A power of doing good always implies a power to do evil if the person or party be disposed. Now, Ellsworth and Jay were making the case that because of this fact, this kind of truth, this maxim of human nature, of power and government all tied together, they were making the case that, well, we can't just give them no power at all because we understand that all power can be abused. The question is, how do you balance it and set things up so it doesn't get abused as often or as badly, or the people have a way to deal with it? But the essential principle is still there. If we don't think about how someone might use that power in the future, we're making a very, very dangerous mistake. Patrick Henry put it like this, again, in the Virginia Ratifying Convention. This is June 5th, 1788. All these original source documents that I'm citing here, because I'm just scratching the surface and giving you a highlight reel here, they'll all be linked to in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Alan Mosley with the 10th Amendment Center, and he's got his own show, It's Too Late, that you should check out. He does a great job organizing the blog posts for every episode, where he has a show link section plus all the various platforms, video and audio platforms, and a bunch of other goodies. I get that published a couple of hours after the live stream is done. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. But one of my favorite Patrick Henry quotes, there are many of these. He said, "Show me that age and country where the rights and liberties of the people were placed on the sole chance of their rulers being good men without a consequent loss of liberty." So if they have a bunch of power and they use the power in the right way, that might be good in the short term, but in the long run, it's terrible. He said, "I say that the loss of that dearest privilege has ever followed with absolute certainty every such mad attempt. Allowing someone to wield all kinds of power, especially power that they're not supposed to be wielding, maybe because the other team did it previously and you're just getting back at them, you're using what they set up, the precedent. This is insanity to someone like Patrick Henry." And I would say Patrick Henry was absolutely right. Now, he reiterated this same point a few days later as well. He said, if you have a good president, senators, and representatives, there is no danger. But can this be expected from human nature? And if you answered no, you definitely passed Patrick Henry's quiz on the Constitution and liberty. And that's why Richard Henry Lee, I think, put it this way. Here he is in a letter to Patrick Henry in May of 1789. This is as the debates over a potential Bill of Rights are getting ready to heat up. He's discussing this with Patrick Henry, discussing what Mr. Madison might be doing in the House of Representatives. Richard Henry Lee, anti-federalist from Virginia, was a senator along with William Grayson. But anyways, he writes to Patrick Henry, he said, "It must never be forgotten that the liberties of the people are not so safe under the gracious manner of government as by the limitation of power." Again, the TLDR is very, very clear here that if someone has a bunch of power, even if they do the right thing, your liberty is gone, whether it's today or somewhere down the line. And that's why the only way to ensure that liberty is protected is by, well, limitation of power. And here we are again in the Virginia Ratifying Convention. Patrick Henry again, without real checks, it will not suffice that some of them are good. A good president or senator or representative will have a natural weakness. Virtue will slumber. The wicked will be continually watching. Consequently, you will be undone. So even if you have some good people in office, if it's a mix, that's going to end up with a destruction of liberty. And again, the more centralized the power is, according to Henry, he said consolidation is how he described it, is absolutely going to end in the destruction of our liberties. And ultimately, the people need to demand strict adherence to that limitation of power, as mentioned by Richard Henry Lee. And of course, we're talking about under the Constitution of the United States, even if they like the short-term results of going beyond it. Oh, I'll turn a blind eye to this because I like how they're doing that. And ultimately, George Washington called this type of approach a weapon that destroys freedom. Here he is in his farewell address in 1796. He said, if, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. If you think they need more power, and I can't imagine, here we are, we live the so-called land of the free, we have the largest government in the history of the planet. I mean, if you're insane enough to think that they need more power, well, that's what Washington's saying. Go for it. There's a system. It's built into it. Go for it. But, he said, let there be no change by usurpation. Usurpation is robbery. It is a theft of power that doesn't belong to government, stealing power from the sovereign people of the several states, because they did not delegate that power. So anytime they go beyond the limits of the Constitution, this is an act of usurpation. He said, let there be no change by usurpation, for though this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. The precedent must always greatly overbalance in permanent evil any partial or transient benefit which the use can at any time yield. Now, ultimately here, what we're talking about is even if you like the short-term results of their usurpation of power, of wielding power in the largest government in history, you got to oppose it because, well, the long-term precedent is really the problem. And certainly we've got that all around us today. And unfortunately for all of us today, there are a lot of people out there who are all for strictly limiting power. There are millions of them. But it happens to be that they're only for that when their other team is in power in Washington, D.C. And we see it flip back and forth every few years. And then when they get in power, it's all about, well, building on the previous person's usurpations of power instead of actually restricting it. The result is, again, in this so-called land of the free, we live under the largest government in history. And that's why here at the TAC, we work so hard every single day to reach and teach more and more people about these essential principles from the founders and the old revolutionaries, and nothing helps us get that job done more than the financial faith and support of our members. So I want to take a quick moment to say a huge thank you. It may be a fast one, but it's a very, very deep thank you. My deepest gratitude goes out to just a handful of people who have joined us as members recently. There's Charles in Utah. Thank you. Noel in California, James in Colorado, Dennis in Virginia, Alice in Oklahoma, John in Pennsylvania. I could say thank you endlessly, and it would not be enough. I'm so grateful for your support. And if you want to join them and help us do this work in support of the Constitution and liberty, even when government doesn't like it, they don't, 24/7, 365. Again, our membership program starts out at just $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. And if you can't help us out financially, or you're not really ready to do that as of yet, I feel if you stick around, you will be convinced that we're worthy of your support. But there are a bunch of other free and easy peasy ways that you can help us spread the word, primarily by triggering algorithms of the mainstream platforms, doing things like hitting like buttons, subscribing, getting notifications, comments, especially in the archive, reviews on the podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, etc. All that stuff really can help us spread the word, and I'm very grateful for your support. I do hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it made you think. I hope you learned something. That's more important than anything, and I look forward to seeing you next time here on the Path to Liberty.